My name is Beatrice Croft, and for 70 years, I have believed that a mother's love is the most unshakable force in the universe. That belief shattered on a Tuesday morning, along with my best china teacup, when my granddaughter, Chloe, slammed my own house keys down on my kitchen counter. "Nana, be a dear and have breakfast ready by 5 a.m. sharp tomorrow," she announced, not even looking at me as she scrolled through her phone. "Trent has a very specific morning routine. He likes everything just so." She said it like she was the lady of the manor, and I was the scullery maid who'd come with the property. I stood there, frozen, my hand still on the kettle, the ghost of my late husband, Harold, seeming to stir in his favorite armchair by the window. This was the house we built. The house where I raised my son, where I rocked Chloe to sleep, where I've watched 50 years of sunrises over my garden. And now she was giving me orders. They'd arrived the day before. Chloe and her new husband, Trent, a man with a smile as polished as his expensive shoes and eyes that calculated the value of everything they landed on, including me. No phone call, no warning. Just the crunch of gravel, and there they were, suitcases in hand, declaring they were here for an extended visit. "It's so peaceful out here, Nana," Chloe had cooed, her voice dripping a false sweetness I hadn't heard since she was 16 and wanted the car keys. The perfect place for Trent to focus on his new business ventures. "And you must get so lonely." I wasn't lonely. I was at peace. I had my garden, my books, the quiet company of my own thoughts. But within hours that peace was invaded. Trent held court in my living room, his voice a constant, low drone about market fluctuations and asset portfolios, his gaze forever wandering over the inherited furniture, the original art, the very land my house stood on. That first night, as I lay in the bed I'd shared with Harold for 45 years, I heard them talking downstairs. Their voices, meant to be hushed, carried up the old heating vents. "Prime real estate, Chloe. Undervalued and underutilized. She's sitting on a gold mine and doesn't even know it." "I know, darling. But we have to be careful. She's stubborn. Everyone has a price, sweetheart. Or a pressure point." A cold dread, colder than any winter this old house had known, began to seep into my bones. This wasn't a visit. This was a reconnaissance mission. So when Chloe made her 5 a.m. breakfast demand the next morning, it wasn't a surprise. It was a declaration of war. She was testing the boundaries, seeing how much of my own home I would relinquish. I, Beatrice Croft, who had survived widowhood, economic downturns, and a hip replacement, looked at my granddaughter's entitled face and made a decision. "Of course, dear," I said, my voice as calm as a mill pond. 5 a.m. Sharp. I'll make sure everything is perfect for Trent." The smile she gave me was one of pure, unadulterated triumph. She thought she'd won. She thought I was folding. "Oh, you foolish girl. You have no idea who you're dealing with." That night I went to bed early. But I didn't sleep. I planned. At 3 a.m. I was in my kitchen, the familiar territory now a stage for my quiet rebellion. The coffee was brewed strong and black, just as Trent liked it. But into his special mug, the one Chloe had bought him that said "King of the Deal," I stirred a generous helping of a tasteless powdered laxative I kept for moments when things needed to move along. The eggs Benedict were a work of art. Harold always said my hollandaise was the best in the county. And into that buttery, lemony perfection, I whisked another, heftier dose of my secret ingredient. A special breakfast for a special son-in-law who thought my life was underutilized. At 4:55 a.m., I heard his footsteps on the stairs. Trent entered the kitchen, already dressed in a monogrammed shirt, his phone pressed to his ear. He paused, seeing the spread on the table. "Gotta call you back, the situation here is handled," he said into the phone, a slow, impressed smile spreading across his face. "Beatrice, you didn't have to go to all this trouble." "No trouble at all, Trent," I said, pouring his coffee. "I aim to please." I watched him eat. I watched him drink. I savored every smug compliment he paid my domestic skills. He finished his plate, drained his mug, and patted his mouth with a linen napkin. "Perfect," he declared, standing up. "I have a very important video call with some investors at 9. Can't be late for that." "Oh, I'm sure it will be a morning you won't soon forget," I said sweetly. And as I began to wash the dishes, the first act of my gentle revenge already working its way through his system, I allowed myself a small, grim smile. The pawns had been moved. The game was afoot. The first rumble of the coming storm hit at precisely 8:47 a.m. I was in my garden, ostensibly pruning my roses, but really just enjoying the morning sun and waiting. I didn't have to wait long. A strangled cry from upstairs was followed by the sound of a bathroom door slamming shut. A few minutes later, Trent appeared at the back door, his face pale and beaded with sweat. The king of the deal looked decidedly less regal. "Beatrice," he croaked, "where do you keep the Pepto-Bismol?" "The medicine cabinet, dear," I said, not looking up from a particularly stubborn rose branch. "Are you feeling quite all right? You look a bit green around the gills." He didn't answer, already stumbling back inside. Chloe came down shortly after, her face a mask of concern. "Nana, Trent's terribly ill. He thinks it might be food poisoning from that seafood place we went to yesterday." "How dreadful," I clucked sympathetically. The human body can be so unpredictable. Over the next 2 hours, the sounds of Trent's distress became the soundtrack of the house. His important investor call was, of course, cancelled. By lunchtime, he was a shivering wreck bundled under blankets on the sofa, while Chloe fluttered around him like a nervous sparrow. I brought him a glass of water. "Perhaps you should see a doctor, Trent. This seems severe." His eyes, full of a new watery misery, met mine. For a fleeting second, I saw something else there, not just sickness but a flicker of suspicion. But it was quickly drowned out by another cramp. He groaned and shuffled back towards the stairs. This was my opening. While the household was in disarray, I retreated to Harold's old study, my study. I booted up the desktop computer my son had insisted I learn to use. I had a feeling, a deep grandmotherly intuition, that Trent's business ventures needed a little looking into. It took most of the afternoon. My fingers, more used to kneading dough than typing, were slow and clumsy. But I was stubborn. I found property records. I found business registrations. I found a trail of LLCs with grand names and very little substance. One name kept appearing in the public comments of a county forum, Castleman Holdings, linked to a complaint from an elderly man in a nearby town about a predatory property scheme. My blood ran cold. It was all true. This wasn't just a feeling, it was a pattern. That evening, a weakened Trent and a frantic Chloe tried to resurrect their plan. Over a bland dinner of broth and toast, Trent fixed me with what he must have thought was a sincere gaze. "Beatrice, this incident today just highlights how vulnerable you are out here. If you had a real medical emergency, well, who would know? Our offer to help you transition to a nice, manageable retirement community still stands. I could handle the sale of this place, invest the proceeds for you. You'd be set for life." I looked from his pale, earnest face to Chloe's, which was nodding in vigorous agreement. They were like vultures circling a wounded animal, except the animal was me, and I was far from wounded. "It's a generous offer, Trent," I said, folding my napkin neatly. "But a decision this large requires consultation. I'll need to speak to my solicitor, and to Alistair, my financial advisor." The change in the room was immediate. Trent's jaw tightened. Chloe's smile became strained. "Nana, that's not necessary," Chloe said quickly. "Trent is an expert. He can handle everything." "I'm sure he can," I replied calmly. "But at my age, one learns to be thorough. I'd also like to speak to your first wife, Trent. Margaret, wasn't it? I'm sure she could provide a lovely character reference." The color that had slowly been returning to Trent's face drained away completely. The spoon he was holding clattered against his bowl. My ex-wife? She's not a well woman, Beatrice. Bitter. She wouldn't tell you the truth. "Oh, I think I'm a good judge of character," I said, my voice soft but sharp as a needle. "I've had 70 years of practice." I stood up, collecting the plates. "I'll be in my study making those calls. You two should rest. Trent, you look like you've seen a ghost." I left them there in the silent, tense dining room. The trap was set. I didn't know what I would find when I started making those calls, but I knew one thing for certain. The helpless old granny they thought they were manipulating had just disappeared. In her place was a woman who had just discovered she held all the cards, and she was only just learning how to play them. The next 48 hours were a whirlwind of quiet investigation and grim discovery. My solicitor, a lovely, sharp-minded woman named Fiona Abra, was horrified when I told her the situation. My financial advisor, Alistair, was equally appalled and immediately began a deep dive into Trent's business history. The phone call with Margaret, Trent's first wife, was the most enlightening. Her voice was not bitter, but weary and deeply sad. "He took everything, Beatrice," she told me, her voice trembling down the line. "My catering business, my savings. He's a charming parasite. He finds a host, drains them dry, and moves on. Please don't let him do to you what he did to me." She told me about the fake investment portfolios, the pressured property sales, the way he used personal relationships as a key to the vault. She confirmed the name Castleman Holdings and gave me the name of another victim, a man named Arthur Peabody, who had lost his family's farm. Called Arthur next. His story was the same, only the details were different. The script was identical. The charm, the feigned concern, the gradual takeover, the financial ruin. I sat in my study, surrounded by the evidence of my own narrow escape, a cold fury settling in my heart. This wasn't just about my house. This was about a predator, and my own granddaughter had delivered him to my doorstep. The confrontation came the following morning. Trent, feeling better and clearly believing he could still salvage his scheme, cornered me in the kitchen. "Beatrice, we need to talk about your future," he began, his smile back in place, though it didn't reach his eyes. "We do," I agreed, turning to face him. Chloe stood behind him, a silent accomplice. "I've been doing some thinking and some calling. I spoke to Margaret, and to Arthur Peabody." The smile vanished. "Those people are liars. They failed in their business ventures and are looking for someone to blame. I also spoke to the county clerk's office about Castleman Holdings," I continued, my voice steady, "and to the detective sergeant investigating the complaints against it." That stopped him cold. He took a step back. "You had no right," Chloe started, but I cut her off, my gaze snapping to her. "I had every right. This is my home. My life. And you brought a wolf into it, wrapped in a designer suit." I looked back at Trent. "Your game is over. I know what you are. The police know what you are. I suggest you leave. Now." For a moment, pure, unadulterated rage flashed in Trent's eyes. The charming facade crumbled to dust, revealing the cold, calculating man beneath. He took a step towards me, and for the first time I felt a prickle of genuine fear. But then the doorbell rang. We all froze. I walked to the door and opened it to find Detective Sergeant Miller on my porch, his badge held up, his expression grave. "Mrs. Croft? I'm D.S. Miller. We spoke on the phone. We'd like to have a word with Mr. Trent Wallace." I stepped back and gestured inside. "He's right here, officer." The look on Trent's face as the detective read him his rights was something I will cherish for the rest of my days. It was a beautiful cocktail of shock, fury, and the dawning realization that he, the master manipulator, had been utterly and completely outmaneuvered by a 70-year-old woman with a laxative and a telephone. Chloe stood in the middle of the living room, sobbing, as her new husband was led away in handcuffs. She turned to me, her face a mess of tears and mascara. "How could you, Nana? I loved him." "No, Chloe," I said, my voice heavy with a grief I hadn't allowed myself to feel until that moment. "You loved the idea of him. And in doing so, you were willing to sacrifice me." She packed her bags and left an hour later, without another word. The silence that descended upon the house was profound. It wasn't the peaceful silence I was used to. It was a silence haunted by betrayal. But as I stood at my window watching the police car disappear down the lane, I didn't feel defeated. I felt resolved. The battle for my home was won. But the war against the Trents of the world was just beginning. And I, Beatrice Croft, had just enlisted. The weeks that followed were a blur of legal proceedings and personal reckoning. Trent, faced with the mountain of evidence I and others had provided, eventually pleaded guilty to multiple counts of fraud and embezzlement. He would be enjoying government accommodation for the next 5 to 7 years. Chloe sent a letter. It was full of self-pity and justification, blaming me for her ruined life. I read it once, then threw it in the fire. Some bridges once burned cannot be rebuilt. The pain of that was a deep, private ache, but it did not break me. It forged me. It was D.S. Miller who planted the seed of my new purpose. He came to see me after the sentencing. "Mrs. Croft, the work you did, it was exceptional. You noticed the patterns we miss. You gained the trust of other victims in a way we never could. He leaned forward, his hands clasped. There are more people like Trent out there. More Castlemans preying on the elderly. We're starting a new initiative, a community outreach and investigation support group. We could use someone with your perspective. He was asking me to become a consultant. Me, Beatrice Croft, who still had flour in her apron pocket, and preferred a good mystery novel to a police procedural. I thought of Arthur Peabody, who had wept with relief when I'd called to tell him Trent had been arrested. I thought of Margaret finally feeling a sense of justice. I thought of all the other BS out there, living alone in houses full of memories, who might not be as lucky or as stubborn as I had been. What would I have to do? I asked. It started small. I began by speaking at local community centers, sharing my story in simple, relatable terms. I talked about the warning signs, the sudden, overly attentive new friend or relative, the pressure to make quick financial decisions, the isolation from old advisors. I saw the nods of recognition, the fearful glances between neighbors. I was giving a voice to a fear they hadn't dared to name. Then Fiona, my solicitor, connected me with a national charity focused on elder rights. They provided training, resources, and a network. I learned about the sophisticated psychological tricks these criminals used, the way they exploited loneliness and grief. I was no longer just a victim, I was becoming an expert. My first real test came a few months later. D.S. Miller called me about a case in a neighboring county. An elderly gentleman, a retired teacher named George, was being courted by a smooth-talking property developer, who was a dead ringer for Trent in both method and manner. The police had suspicions but no proof. George, flattered by the attention, was days away from signing over power of attorney. "He won't listen to us, Mrs. Croft," D.S. Miller said. "But he might listen to you." So I put on my best Sunday dress, baked a batch of scones and went to visit George. I didn't go as a police informant. I went as a neighbor, a fellow senior who'd been through something similar. We had tea. We talked about our gardens. And then gently I told him my story. I didn't accuse his new friend. I just talked about Trent. I saw the dawning horror in George's eyes as the parallels became impossible to ignore. The next day, he called his own solicitor and canceled the meeting with the developer. The man, realizing the game was up, vanished. Another home, another life saved. The victory was sweeter than any I had ever known. It filled the hollow space Chloe had left behind. Today my life is busier than it ever was. My kitchen table is often covered not with baking, but with case files and notepads. I have a mobile phone now, and I know how to use it to video call with other volunteers across the country. I've helped dismantle 3 other criminal operations, not with laxatives this time, but with wisdom, patience, and an unshakable belief in doing what's right. They call me the Granny Guardian in the press sometimes. It's a silly name, but if it makes even one person stop and think before they sign away their life, then I'll wear it with pride. Trent thought my life was underutilized. He saw a lonely old woman in a big empty house. He was wrong. This house isn't empty. It's full of love and memory and strength. And this old woman? She's just getting started. So if you're watching this and you're feeling alone or pressured, remember my story. Remember that your voice matters. Your experience matters. And sometimes the quietest person in the room is the most dangerous to those who would do harm. Thank you for listening. Don't forget to subscribe and share your own stories in the comments below. You never know who you might help. This is Beatrice Croft signing off for now. The Granny Guardian work became my new purpose. My quiet study, once a sanctuary for memories of Harold, now hummed with the quiet energy of a mission control. Fiona Abra, my solicitor, had become a trusted ally. Her sharp legal mind a perfect complement to my intuitive, ground-level understanding of these cons. D.S. Miller was my conduit to the official world of law enforcement, often passing along cases that needed a softer touch. It was through this network that I heard about the Silver Circle. It wasn't a single criminal, but a sophisticated syndicate, more venomous and far-reaching than Trent could ever have dreamed of being. They didn't just rely on charm. They used forged documents, complex financial instruments, and a network of corrupt appraisers and lawyers. Their targets were exclusively women over 65 with significant unencumbered assets, women like me. The name first came up during a meeting with a tearful woman named Agnes, who traveled 3 hours by train to sit at my kitchen table. She clutched a tissue in her gnarled hands as she told me how her late husband's business partner had generously helped her sell her large family home after she'd had a minor fall. The sale price was suspiciously low, and the promised annuity payments had stopped after 3 months. He said it was all managed by a group called the Silver Circle, Agnes whispered, her voice trembling. Said they were experts in senior asset liberation. I felt so foolish, Beatrice. Asset liberation. The phrase made my blood run cold. It was the same chilling euphemism Trent had used. I took her hands in mine. You are not foolish, Agnes. You were betrayed. And we are going to do something about it. After she left, fortified by tea and a promise of help, I called D.S. Miller. The line was quiet for a long moment after I mentioned the name. Beatrice, he said, his voice uncharacteristically grim. This is bigger than we thought. We've heard whispers of the Silver Circle. They're careful, professional, and they have a habit of making evidence and witnesses disappear. I need you to be extra careful. A prickle of fear, the first since Trent's arrest, traced its way down my spine. But it was quickly followed by a surge of determination. They targeted Agnes. They targeted women who were alone and vulnerable. They saw us as easy prey. Then we must be more careful than they are, I replied, my voice steady. Agnes has given us a thread. Let's see what happens when we pull it. The thread led to a name. Alastair Finch. According to the paperwork Agnes brought, he was the financial consultant who had handled her sale. A few days of discreet digging by Fiona revealed that Alastair Finch was not just a consultant. He was a man with a history. He'd been charged with fraud twice before, but the cases had collapsed when key witnesses recanted their statements or failed to appear in court. The pattern was clear. The Silver Circle didn't just con people. They intimidated them into silence. I was compiling my notes on Finch when my doorbell rang. Expecting Fiona, I opened the door without a second thought. The man standing on my porch was not Fiona. He was in his late 40s with a worn, weary face and kind, sad eyes. He held his cap nervously in his hands. Mrs. Croft? My name is David. David Wallace, he said. I was married to Margaret. Trent's first wife's second husband. My mind raced. How can I help you, David? He looked past me as if checking for watchers. May I come in? It's about the people who ruined my wife. I led him to the kitchen, the site of so many recent stratagems. Over a strong cup of tea, his story spilled out. After Trent had drained Margaret's catering business, the stress had broken her. She'd fallen into a deep depression. David, a quiet, steady man who ran a small garage, had done everything he could to help her rebuild. But the shadow of what Trent had done never left. She took her own life 6 months ago, Mrs. Croft, David said, his voice cracking. She left a note. She said she couldn't live with the shame and the debt. She mentioned a name, a man she said was above Trent. A man named Alastair Finch. The air left my lungs. The thread had just become a chain, linking my past to this new, more dangerous present. Trent was a foot soldier. Finch was an officer. The police knew, David continued. But without concrete proof, they said their hands were tied. Then I read about you in the paper. The Granny Guardian. I thought, if anyone would listen, it would be you. I looked at this grieving man. His life shattered by the same cruelty that had knocked on my door. The fight was no longer abstract. It had a name, Margaret. It had a face, David's. I'm listening, David, I said softly. And I believe you. With David's testimony and Agnes's documents, D.S. Miller finally had enough to bring Alastair Finch in for questioning. But as he predicted, Finch was slick. He had answers for everything. The low sale price? A declining market. The missing payments? A clerical error being rectified. He was polite, condescending, and utterly untouchable. He was released without charge after a few hours. The message was clear. Traditional methods wouldn't work. The Silver Circle was too well insulated. It was Fiona who proposed the radical plan. They use relationships as a weapon, Beatrice. What if we turned that back on them? The idea was audacious, dangerous, and the only one that had a chance of working. We would set a honey trap. I would be the bait. The plan was for me to present myself as a new potential target. A wealthy, slightly confused widow, disillusioned with her current financial advisor and feeling isolated after a falling out with her family. A story that, apart from the wealth, was painfully close to the truth. Through a carefully constructed series of events, we would lure one of the Silver Circle's recruiters to me. D.S. Miller was vehemently opposed. "It's too risky, Beatrice. These are not amateurs. If they suspect a trap, then they will simply move on to another real victim." I finished for him. "I understand the risk, Robert, but I am willing to take it. For Agnes. For Margaret." After a long, tense debate, he reluctantly agreed. The operation was greenlit. My house was wired for sound and video. A surveillance team was set up in a van down the lane. I was given a panic button on a necklace and another sewn into the cuff of my cardigan. I felt a strange calm as I prepared. This was no longer just about protecting my home. It was about justice. It was about ensuring no other David would have to sit at a stranger's kitchen table, clutching his cap and speaking of a lost wife. Her name was Isabel. She was in her 50s, impeccably dressed, with a warm maternal smile that didn't quite reach her calculating eyes. Our chance meeting occurred at a local charity coffee morning. I was persuaded to attend. She sat next to me, complimented my brooch, and spoke wistfully of her own late mother. The performance was flawless. Over the next 2 weeks, a carefully orchestrated friendship blossomed. We had lunch. She called to check on me. She listened with seemingly genuine sympathy as I played my part, the lonely widow worried about money, feeling overwhelmed by the burden of a large house. "You know, Beatrice," she said one day, leaning across the table at a quaint tea shop, "you remind me so much of my mother. It breaks my heart to think of you struggling. My brother Alistair is a financial whiz. He specializes in helping people in your exact situation. He could take all the worry away." Alistair. The name landed like a stone in my stomach. We had our link. The hook was set. The meeting was arranged for a Thursday afternoon at my house. The air was thick with tension. The surveillance team was in position. Fiona was parked nearby, ready to move. D.S. Miller was coordinating from the station. Isabel arrived with Alistair Finch in tow. He was exactly as I'd imagined from his photo. A bland, forgettable face, the kind you wouldn't look at twice in a crowd. But his handshake was firm, his gaze assessing. The conversation began. He was good. Better than Trent. He didn't push, he empathized. He spoke of legacy planning and stress-free living. He painted a picture of a peaceful future in a beautiful, secure apartment complex. All my bills paid for by the intelligent management of my assets. As he spoke, he subtly began isolating me. "Sometimes family don't understand," he said, with a sympathetic glance. "They can be so entitled. It's your money, Beatrice. Your life. You deserve to enjoy your golden years without being a bank for your relatives." He was using my real, painful estrangement from Chloe as a lever. The cruelty of it took my breath away. I played my part, nodding along the vulnerable, impressionable widow. Then he slid a folder across the table. "These are just preliminary figures, of course, but I think you'll be pleasantly surprised." It was the moment of truth. This was the evidence D.S. Miller needed. A direct offer on record, using the same fraudulent valuations and misleading projections as in Agnes's case. I looked at the document, then at Finch. I let the facade drop for just a second, allowing the steel I felt inside to show in my eyes. "It's a very interesting proposal, Mr. Finch," I said, my voice losing its wavering quality. "But I'll need to show it to my solicitor, Fiona Abra, and my friend, Detective Sergeant Miller. I believe you're acquainted with both." The change in the room was electric. Finch's bland mask shattered into a mosaic of shock and pure rage. Isabel gasped, her hand flying to her mouth. "You!" Finch snarled, standing up so quickly his chair scraped back. That's when everything went wrong. The front door, which I had deliberately left unlocked for the surveillance team, burst open. But it wasn't D.S. Miller. It was 2 large, grim-faced men I had never seen before. Finch's backup. "The old bitch set us up," one of them growled. "Grab her." The carefully laid plan devolved into chaos in a heartbeat. One of the men lunged for me. I reacted on pure instinct, jamming my thumb hard onto the panic button in my cardigan cuff. "The police are on their way," I shouted, scrambling back from the table. Finch was already moving, snatching the incriminating folder from the table. It doesn't matter. Without this, it's her word against ours. But I was faster than they expected. With a sweep of my arm, I sent my full teacup flying. It wasn't a weapon, but it was a distraction. The hot liquid splashed across Finch's hands and the documents. He cried out, dropping the folder. Papers scattered across my kitchen floor. The sound of sirens cut through the air, growing rapidly closer. The two thugs froze, looking at Finch for direction. The calculus of the situation had changed. Assault and kidnapping were very different charges from fraud. Forget her. Go, Finch yelled, making a break for the back door. But D.S. Miller and his team were already there, flooding in from both front and back, weapons drawn. The room was suddenly full of shouting, the clatter of handcuffs, and Isabel's hysterical sobbing. In the midst of it all, I stood by my kitchen counter, my heart hammering against my ribs, and met Alistair Finch's gaze as he was forced to his knees. The rage in his eyes was a tangible force. "This isn't over, you meddling old crone," he spat. D.S. Miller stepped between us. "It is for you, Finch. It's over." He then looked at me, his face a mixture of professional focus and profound relief. "Beatrice? Are you hurt?" I took a deep, steadying breath, smoothing down my apron. "No, Robert. I'm quite all right. But I do believe they've made a terrible mess of my kitchen." The arrest of Alistair Finch and his associates was a watershed moment. He, unlike Trent, decided to talk. Facing a long prison sentence and presented with the mountain of evidence we had compiled, from Agnes's case, David's testimony, and the recorded meeting in my kitchen, he turned state's evidence to save his own skin. The information he provided was a tidal wave. It exposed a network of corruption that reached into local government, the legal profession, and even the financial sector. The Silver Circle was dismantled, its members arrested, its assets seized. Dozens of cold cases were solved, and millions of pounds were identified for restitution to victims like Agnes. The press had a field day. The Granny Guardian was front-page news again, but this time as a national hero. I was invited to speak on television, my story dramatized for a true crime documentary. It was surreal, watching actors portray the most terrifying day of my life. Through it all, the quiet, satisfying work continued. The charity I worked with saw a surge in donations and volunteers. A new national helpline was established, bearing my name. The Beatrice Protocol for Identifying and Investigating Elder Financial Abuse was adopted by police forces across the country. One afternoon, a check arrived in the post. It was my share of the restitution from the Silver Circle's seized assets, a surprisingly substantial sum. I stared at it for a long time. It wasn't just money, it was a symbol. A down payment on justice. I endorsed it over to the charity, specifying it be used for legal aid for victims. Harold would have approved. We had always believed that a house was made of more than bricks and mortar. It was made of the love and integrity within it. This felt like an extension of that principle. Amid the whirlwind of interviews and accolades, a different kind of letter arrived. The handwriting on the envelope was achingly familiar. "Chloe." My hand trembled as I opened it. This one was not full of blame. It was short and starkly simple. "Nana, I saw you on the news. I read about what you did. I finally understand what Trent was and what I helped him do. There are no words for my shame. I am getting the help I should have gotten years ago. I don't expect you to forgive me. I just wanted you to know that I see you now. I see the woman you really are. I am so sorry." Chloe, I read it 3 times, then folded it carefully and placed it in the small rosewood box on my mantelpiece, next to Harold's favorite pipe. The pain was still there, a deep, permanent crack in my heart. But for the first time since she had left, it was not a raw, bleeding wound. It was a scar, a testament to a hurt survived. Forgiveness was a bridge too far, a country I was not yet ready to visit. But the door which I had thought slammed shut forever was now perhaps open just a crack. Not for her to walk back in, but for the possibility of something else. Something new, built on the ruins of the old. A year after the Finch operation, my life had found a new, peaceful rhythm. The media attention had died down, and I had returned to a quieter, though still active, role with the charity. I was a mentor now, training a new generation of volunteers, many of them seniors themselves who had found purpose in protecting their peers. I was in my garden, the scene of so much quiet contemplation, planting a new rose bush, a hardy deep crimson variety called Ingrid Bergman. It was a gift from the team at D.S. Miller's station. Fiona came by, as she often did on a Saturday, with a bag of fresh scones and the latest gossip from the legal world. We sat on the bench Harold had built, looking out over the blooms. "You've started a revolution, you know, Beatrice," she said, biting into a scone. "The new Elder Financial Protection Act has its second reading in Parliament next month. They're calling it Beatrice's Law." I shook my head, a little embarrassed. "It was a team effort, Fiona. It always is. But it started with you," she insisted gently. With one woman who said no. We sat in comfortable silence, listening to the bees hum in the lavender. I thought about the journey from that first shocking breakfast demand to this moment of quiet triumph. I had not just saved my home. I had helped build a fortress for others. My legacy would not be a perfect garden or a well-kept house. It would be a helpline that rang in the night, a protocol in a police manual, a law on the books. It would be the knowledge that somewhere, another grandmother was sleeping safely in her own bed tonight, because of the path I had chosen to walk. It was a good legacy. It was enough. Spring turned to summer, and with it came an invitation I never expected. The local primary school, which Chloe had once attended, asked if I would come and speak to the children for their Community Heroes Week. I arrived feeling slightly absurd. What could I possibly say to a room full of 6- and 7-year-olds about financial fraud? But the teacher, a bright-eyed young woman, was insistent. "Just talk about being brave," she said. "About standing up for what's right." So I did. I sat in a tiny chair, surrounded by wide-eyed children, and I told them a story. Not about conspiracies or wiretaps, but about a grandmother who loved her home very much, and who had to be very brave and very clever when some not very nice people tried to take it away. I talked about trusting your instincts, about the importance of being kind, and how even the smallest person can have the courage of a lion. Afterwards, as I was leaving, a little girl with red pigtails tugged on my cardigan. "My Nana lives by herself," she whispered, her voice full of grave importance. "I'm going to call her every day to make sure she's okay." I knelt down, my eyes suddenly stinging. "That," I said, my voice thick with emotion, "is the most important job in the world." In that moment, I understood the full, rippling impact of my work. It wasn't just about catching criminals or changing laws. It was about planting seeds. It was about teaching a new generation to watch over the old, to value wisdom, and to recognize that heroes don't always wear capes. Sometimes they wear aprons and have flour on their hands. Today, the air is turning crisp, the first leaves of autumn beginning to blush gold and red. I am sitting at my kitchen table, the same table where Trent ate his fateful eggs Benedict. The house is quiet, but it is no longer a silence of loneliness. It is a silence of contentment, of a life fully lived and a battle honorably fought. On the table beside me is a photograph. It's a recent one sent to me by David Wallace. He's standing outside his garage, smiling, a picture of his Margaret framed and hanging proudly inside the office window. He's started a small fund in her name to help survivors of financial abuse repair their cars, to give them back their mobility, their independence. The circle of healing continues. My work is not over. I still take calls from the helpline. I still advise the police on difficult cases. But the frantic, frontline urgency has passed. I have passed the torch to others. The back door opens and a voice calls out, "Nana? I've brought cake." It's Chloe. Not the entitled girl who stormed into my kitchen, but a quieter, more thoughtful woman. We are careful with each other, respectful of the chasm that once lay between us. We are building something new, brick by careful brick. It will never be what it was, but it is something true, and for that I am grateful. We sit and have tea. We talk about her therapy, her new job at a garden center, her life. She doesn't stay long, but her visits are no longer fraught with tension. They are a gift. After she leaves, I walk to the window. The sun is setting, painting the sky in shades of orange and purple. Harold's rose bushes are preparing for their winter sleep, but I know they will bloom again, more beautiful than ever come spring. They thought I was useless. They thought I was past my season. But a garden, like a life, has many seasons. The autumn of my life has been the most fruitful of all. I am Beatrice Croft. I am 72 years old, and my story is a testament to a simple, powerful truth. It is never too late to become the hero of your own life. Thank you for listening. Remember to cherish your loved ones, trust your instincts, and never, ever underestimate a granny with a cause.